In the far north was the residence of Grand Duke Reynald of Blaine. The head of the Blaine family himself, Reynald Blaine, was talking to his guest at that moment. The man wondered why the lady of the Netri family from the south of the country had come with the animal. This lady turned out to be Schwer Netri, a member of the Netri family from the far south of the country. The Duke looked closely at the young woman in front of him and smiled. The girl hoped the man would like the eggs or the chicken dishes. Schwer joked and said that the rooster was a gift from the carriage owner from whom she rented it. Instead, the girl asked for permission to hold the Duke's hand just once. She wanted to at least get the man's autograph or fingerprint on some piece of paper. She even handed him a special paper she had prepared on the way to the duchy. She admitted that she would keep this paper as a precious family heirloom. The Duke was not impressed by her proposal, so he called a servant and immediately ordered the girl to be taken away. However, Schwer asked for another chance and said she would get straight to the point. Suddenly, the young woman fell to her knees in front of the man, showed him the ring, and offered to marry him. Some time later, the heroine was lying in bed looking at the engagement ring. She went a long way to propose marriage to a man, but he didn't care. Initially, she thought it would be difficult, but even the local guards turned out to be tough guys. But the girl had no turning back, because she had traveled all this way from south to north. The main character of this romantic story is Reynald Blaine, Grand Duke of the North, the second main character of a fantasy novel called Blooming Princess. The Duke inherited from his family the ability to use emotions as a sword. Over time, he ran out of emotions, losing all his feelings due to frequent monster slaying. At first, the heroine was jealous of him because he became the character who hooked her. In the real world, the girl's parents died and numerous relatives wanted to take advantage of her insurance payments, and they manipulated her. It started with envy, but at some point, the heroine began to sincerely support Reynald. Her life, filled with a series of disappointments and empty hopes, ended with Reynald's death. Due to the protagonist's indifference, the Duke lost his last feelings. As the Duke could no longer use his strength, the North fell along with its master. Therefore, the girl hoped to take advantage of the second chance and ensure she saved the Duke and witness his happiness. 2 weeks before arriving in the North, after a girl was hit by a truck, she opened her eyes to a completely different world. At that moment, she was putting together a composition when a man burst into the room and began to accuse her of trying to disgrace the family. The man called the girl by her new name, and then she realized what kind of romance she was really in. The man kept shouting that they receive many complaints about the girl every day. Our heroine didn't listen at all, but kept looking around, trying to understand the situation. She realized she was in the body of Schwer, a minor villain in a novel about a blooming princess, and the eldest daughter of the southern Duke Netri family. From generation to generation, the firstborn of the Duke's family inherited the ability to make flowers bloom with every sword strike. However, in this generation, the ability passed to the second daughter, Irina, which made the eldest feel inferior. When this feeling overflowed, the Duke's eldest daughter tried to poison the main character, Irina. In the end, she was executed for trying to harm her family, which is what our heroine was now facing. The girl looked in the mirror and realized that the red hair and golden eyes definitely belonged to the novel's villain. The girl realized that the Duke must also be alive, so her task is to protect him at all costs. At that moment, the younger sister entered the room and noticed that Schwer was already helpless, so she shouldn't scold her so much. The girl realized that all her older sister's efforts would be in vain anyway, so she broke the flower pot she was taking care of. The main character of the original novel had just returned from dinner with the emperor, which went very well. The stranger understood that his family relationships were regular, but even this was too much. She noticed the banner of the Imperial Knights in her sister's hands, and approximately 1 year later, Reynald was supposed to die. That's why the girl had to hurry to correct the whole situation in a year. So she announced that she was leaving the family and offered to recognize her as a non-existent daughter. Schwer said she plans to cut ties with her family and start over. The man tried to stop the girl and prevent her from leaving her family. He pointed out that if she took one more step, she would no longer be considered his daughter. However, the heroine just smiled and asked to be let go quickly. After this, the girl ran out of the room, which took her father by surprise, and her sister. She promised herself to help Reynald regain his emotions, even if it was irritation and anger. The girl considered her mission to be saving Reynald and then continuing to live. Watching him in the North, A young woman named Shelley approached our heroine and told her that from now on she would be her personal maid. She noted that the Duke ordered them to accompany the girl and also allowed her to contact him on any matter. She also added that the rooster should be sent to a farm if the heroine does not plan to raise it herself. The maid noticed that if the girl wanted to return to the south, she could quickly prepare a magic stone for teleportation. The redhead was already happy that she wasn't kicked out, but she wanted a continuation of the story with a marriage proposal. Schwer Netri, one of the pillars of the empire, the guardian of public safety in the center of the imperial capital. Blaine is the second pillar of the empire, who exterminates monsters in the north. Both families have been sworn enemies for centuries. Blaine distinguished himself by his cruelty in the art of fighting monsters. The mere mention of his name made people tremble and instilled fear, making their hearts shake. At some point, descendants of the Blaine family began to occupy key positions in the central government. Nedry considered this an abuse of power. Their conflict lasted several generations. Therefore, the fact that the girl was given her own room is a great miracle in itself. If the heart's suggestion didn't work, another method had to be invented. The girl was happy that the hero of the book turned out to be exactly as she imagined while reading. When she saw the Duke in person, he looked perfect. The maid thought the long journey from south to north in the carriage was exhausting, but our heroine enjoyed it all. Sherry was surprised that her new mistress liked the Duke so much. Schwer pointed out that there are not many people in the world capable of lighting a fire in the soul simply by their existence. While celebrating her birthday with loved ones, the heroine spent this day alone, so the girl hoped her favorite character would be happy. At that moment, the captain of the Blaine Guard, John, was talking to his master about a relatively new resident of the estate. He reported that the girl's younger sister had become the commander of the Imperial Knights, and her family disowned her. She was accused of attempted poisoning, so her appearance in the north seemed very suspicious. However, the Duke pointed out that he would never be a victim of poisoning by the talkative lady, that she had already been discovered in the south. The commander noted that it had been a year since his master completely lost his emotions. It has been a long time since he personally led a monster extermination squad, so the enemies might take advantage of this. The Duke was worried that they hadn't heard from his night squad for more than 2 weeks. Therefore, the men concluded that the squad leader was dead and the mission was a failure. Now it was necessary to find the commander's corpse before the monster ate it. The Duke intended to personally lead the detachment, but the commander was worried about his boss. He could not use the power of the clan without his emotions, and the number of abnormal monsters increased. If things continue like this, the Duke will eventually be forced to submit to Blaine's rules. Suddenly, the commander fell silent and looked around, because he felt like someone was eavesdropping on them. He drew his sword and ordered the observer to reveal his identity. The Duke approached the commander and ordered him to calm down and do nothing. At that very moment, our young heroine appeared behind the door and interrupted the conversation. The Duke was surprised how the girl entered the office, because he hadn't told her to. Schwer replied that she spoke to the knights guarding her and asked for their help. Their Duke was disappointed in his subordinates because they were not fulfilling their duty. However, he decided to think about it later, but for now, he was only interested in the reason for the girl's presence in his office. The lady stepped forward and said that more than 24 hours had passed since their last conversation and marriage proposal. She noted that the Duke hurt her feelings, so he must take responsibility for it. The Duke and Commander John looked at the stranger and did not understand what she was trying to achieve. The lady asked permission to draw a portrait of them together. John noted that the girl had very strange sexual inclinations, so he suggested kicking her out, to which she pretended that she was simply very much in love with the Duke, which irritated the commander even more. The Duke did not want to listen to John and was going to search for the missing squad himself. Although according to the novel it was too early for the Duke to die, our heroine was worried about him. She decided to continue bothering him in any way possible, to at least cause him irritation as an emotion. The squad leader was very displeased that the girl interfered in their conversations and distracted the Duke with all sorts of nonsense. However, Reynald promised that he would allow her to take his measures down to his shoe size. Schwer was not going to stop there and ran after the man to ask him a few more questions. She stopped right in front of him and asked what affectionate nickname he wanted her to call him after the wedding. The girl repeated all the cute nicknames she knew, just to take up more of the Duke's time. She was talking nonsense, although she perfectly understood that his name was the prettiest possible. She couldn't think of any other way to stop him. Since he was going to lead the monster extermination, it would be better if he had at least some feelings. Reynald turned around and left in the opposite direction, but promised that he would arrive in a few days, and they would return to the topic of the signature and fingerprint. The girl decided to go even further, so she also asked him to hug her tighter. It was clear that John doubted our heroine's intentions, but the Duke ordered not to touch her. After this, the men went about their business, and our heroine began to recall the events of the original novel. After the Duke's death, John was the only one who walked through the snowy north hoping to find his body. Therefore, it would be good if they started working together as one team. John did not understand how the Duke could go on a mission himself if his ability to use his skills was now limited. However, he noticed that this was no longer a problem, and gradually his emotions began to return to him. Reynald noticed that the Netri daughter went crazy when she decided to go to the far north. John realized that this girl's courage and her sudden proposal awakened some emotions in his boss. A few days later, our heroine was examining all possible frames for portraits on the estate. She looked at the next frame in the light and saw several scratches. The Duke promised that he would leave his mark upon his return. Therefore, the heroine chose a huge frame, which was taller than her, to preserve the mark. The maid noticed that the Duke's mark would be lost and appear as a small dot on the huge canvas. However, Schwer pointed out that the dot is not in the drawing, but in its symbolism, which represents the protection of the North. The Duke promised to listen to everything she had to say, so the girl intended to take advantage of this opportunity. After this, the maid brought the girl the same shirt the Duke wears. However, she realized that he was unlikely to be interested in a small barter. The girls were distracted from their conversation by the sudden sound of horses coming from outside. Someone rang the forge, which meant the return of the owner of the estate and his squad. The maid wanted to help her mistress get ready, but the mistress was already leaving the room. Sherry understood that in any case, she needed to follow this strange girl. Our heroine ran across the estate and quickly looked around. She was among a crowd and tried to find her beloved Duke with her eyes. A little later she saw John, and after him Reynald himself should enter. However, a knight with blonde hair and dirt suddenly jumped right in front of the girl. Our heroine didn't understand at all what this boy needed from her. The boy introduced himself as Nigel, but Schwer didn't remember any character from the novel with the same name. The boy started telling a story about how a monster attacked him, but someone pushed him aside and didn't let him finish. The Duke noticed that if the girl started listening to this story, the knight's chatter wouldn't end. He realized that the girl didn't have to go out to meet him along with the servants. He wasn't at his best, so he suggested continuing the conversation after changing clothes. The lady took the opportunity and asked him to hand over his old clothes and give her a new one in return. At such a proposal, all the gathered servants and knights were shocked and stood paralyzed with their mouths open. The Duke admitted that he didn't remember ever asking the girl about this. However, he was very interested in how she knew exactly what she was wearing, so he further admitted that he simply asked people in the mansion about it while he was away. John still suspected the new resident of his estate. However, the Southerner admitted that she wanted to keep the Duke's old clothes. The men were terrified of what she might do to them in the future. John didn't believe that someone could simply enjoy looking at someone's old, worn clothes. However, he noticed that he couldn't see the Duke every day, so he thought of him when he saw his clothes. The Duke frowned and said that he would change his clothes, and then they would meet in the office. And they would talk. Our heroine was glad that her idea succeeded and worked. The girl sat in the Duke's office and hoped he would want to give her an autograph and a fingerprint. After a while, the owner of the office opened the door and entered, and Schwer greeted him cheerfully. The man brought several documents and sat down at the table not far from the girl. The Duke became interested in knowing if the foreigner was still tired of living with them in the north. The girl noted that not everything was so easy for her, but she was very good at painting. It was very similar to a man who was proud of his only talent. The lady asked what kind of documents the Duke was bringing her. The man realized that these were papers he was willing to sign. The heroine continued to behave strangely and asked for clothes, which made the man doubt his decision for a second. He realized that he hadn't accepted exchanging clothes with her yet. The man handed her a pen and said he would give her his autograph only after the girl signed the document first. The heroine thought she was signing some kind of contract, but it turned out to be a marriage certificate. Only then did she pay attention to the document itself and realize that this was the Duke's answer to her marriage proposal. Schwer thought it was a dream, so she decided to slap herself and wake up. However, the Duke did not let her do this. He took her hand and told her that it was a very bad habit. The lady was delighted to be able to take her husband's surname after the wedding. The Southern woman believed that if she wanted to return the Duke's emotions, she had to stick close to him. The man was not very happy that the heroine was going to watch him sleep. So, the lady explained that she didn't mean anything bad. She just wanted to look at his sweet sleeping face. Reynald noticed that the strange behavior made him nervous, so he asked her to continue in the same spirit. Schwer pointed out that she always acts from the heart and has no hidden meaning. The Duke replied that he was willing to do anything to regain his emotions. Therefore, the girl happily promised to irritate him even more. When the issue of marriage was resolved, the Duke began to take off his gloves. Immediately, he warned that the girl should not expect a closer relationship from him than that of an official spouse. After that, he put his fingerprint on the document, as he had promised. Schwer promised that she would work hard for a bright future for the Duke and the entire North. Although this was not necessary, the girl wanted to do it herself. First of all, she asked the Duke to change the pen and the shirt he had worn previously. After returning from the expedition, most of the knights went to the training ground. The lady went there to take care of the men and said that the Duke had accepted her marriage proposal. With this, she greatly surprised all the assembled knights, especially Commander John. After shaking off their surprise, the men immediately rushed to congratulate their new mistress. Even butler Peter and head maid Athena were happy that the Duke no longer felt lonely. The knights began to bombard their new mistress with a lot of questions. However, John pointed out that the marriage record had not yet been completed, so everyone should return to their seats. He told the new mistress that the girl was interfering with the knights' activities, so she should leave. The lady admitted that she wants to see how her future husband trains. However, John noted that she didn't need this basic training due to her enormous strength and skill. With this, he hoped to scare Schwer away, but she only became even happier. The knight continued to insist that the girl leave and not follow the training. He noted that the knights were worried about the appearance of a new mistress, so they couldn't concentrate. During their dispute, Duke Reynald himself just arrived at the training ground. He wondered why the Southern woman was outside in such cold weather. The butler and the head maid immediately greeted their master. The Duke immediately noticed that his fiancée was wearing the cape that he himself wears during the expedition. The girl admitted that she just asked, and it was brought to her, and they left a new pen on the table. Now the Duke understood what kind of unknown box was on his office desk. As expected, the Duke was not at all bothered by the actions of the Southern woman, so it would be difficult for her to fill the void in his emotions. Reynald admitted that he expected such interest in his training from the swordsman's daughter. The fiancée admitted that she was not going to take off the cape, because she was only interested in those things that the Duke had worn for a long time. After that, Reynald turned to his protégé and asked which of them wanted to train with him in pairs. A knight volunteered to go first, but the Duke still wanted to fight his commander first. Schwer was worried because John had a real sword and Reynald had a wooden one. However, the man noticed that everything was in order and that she would soon understand everything herself. At that moment, the Southern woman saw the art of swordsmanship, which was created to fight monsters, not people. The Duke attacked as if his only goal was to cut his opponent in half. The fiancé remembered that in the original novel, it was said that he loses emotions when he uses the sword. Feelings for beautiful landscapes, for people, all this turns into a blank slate. Blaine can be called a perfect example because morality princes or temporary impulses are not important to him. What was valued was only how well a particular person met the high standards of swordsmanship. If the head of the Blaine family cannot establish these standards, then the skills of his subordinates can be questioned. The novel briefly mentions that the Blaine family has been brutally training its heirs for generations. However, our heroine researched and learned that there was no one to replace the Duke, so she is trying to regain his emotions at any cost. In a year, there will be an abnormal increase in the number of monsters that will wipe out almost all the punitive troops in the north. The girl felt uncomfortable seeing this live, because then everything else could come true. However, she drove these thoughts away and thought only of how to help her future husband. In the original, it was mentioned that the girl has healing powers, because when the real villain was executed, the pierced places filled with flowers. She could use the power in a way other than through the sword, but this only became clear after her death. The lady knew that healing must have something to do with flowers, and hoped to find a clue in the novel. She thought that the real villain was not picking flowers to annoy her father. The Duke distracted her from her thoughts, who suddenly finished his training, and approached the girl. He realized that the girl asked to show her swordsmanship, but she didn't even watch. Only then did the lady realize that the training was over, and John was exhausted. The girl admitted that she was just worried, so she couldn't watch the battle normally. However, she promised that over time she would get used to this sight, and could witness every training session of her beloved husband. The man noted that the North is a very dangerous place, so it would be troublesome if the girl reacted like this every time. However, he thought about how to make his feelings show, even when it was necessary to use the sword. With a smile on her face, the fiancé asked for a bouquet of flowers to be brought to her every time the Duke needed to take the sword in his hands. John was angry because the girl asked him to bring her a bouquet of flowers every time, even though he didn't have a single flower on the estate. Flowers grow very rarely in the north, so you will have to go east to get a fresh bouquet. The Duke admitted that he decided to listen to all her wishes, so he still asked to find a bouquet. Reynald understood that he hadn't felt any emotion for a long time. He could say that with confidence now. The girl takes things and gives others in return. She asks to watch a training session that she isn't interested in. All this bothers him a lot. Fear, excitement, etc. The Duke quickly gets used to all this and loses sensitivity. That's why he needed modifications to use the sword. And that is why the Duke decided to trust his future wife and fulfill her requests. In fact, he felt that the girl was doing everything possible to irritate him. At that moment, his fiancée was sitting in her room and asking the maid if anything had arrived for her. Schwer understood that it was very difficult to find flowers in the north in one day, so she wanted to start growing them. Even the maid admitted that the winter had been especially hard on the flowers, but she couldn't do anything else. The power of Netri, the blooming energy of the sword, is transmitted only to one person per generation. In this generation, Irina bloomed like a poisonous flower, and the Duke's power faded. But after the villain's death, flowers also appeared. The girl did not know how two people from the Netri family bloomed in one generation, but she definitely needed flowers to speed up the process of unlocking her power. If the key to this is growing flowers, then it would be better to deviate from the original to awaken the forces earlier. It was at that moment that someone knocked on the door and reported that the Duke was looking for his fiancée. The girl immediately ran to the gates and opened them as wide as she could. On the threshold stood her handsome future husband, with flowers in his hands. It turned out to be a single camellia branch, tied with a wide white ribbon. The Duke said that this branch was cut from a tree in the greenhouse of an eastern marquis. The Duke admitted that, in the current situation, it would be difficult to find a bouquet in one day, but next time he would try better. The man admitted that it was John who noticed the flowers upon his return to the north. The Duke also pointed out that if a girl didn't like the flowers, she could give them away and wait for the next ones. However, the fiancée immediately hid the flowers behind her back and said she would be delighted to receive any gift. She admitted that she couldn't help but like the gift if it was cut by her future husband's hands. After this, the Duke immediately wanted to leave, but the girl stopped him. She wanted his permission to use the estate's garden. Immediately after Reynald left, Schwer asked the maid to bring her the thickest hardcover album and a vase. The girl intended to keep the flowers and the wide white ribbon for the future. She carefully removed the ribbon and folded it right in the middle of the album, between sheets of paper. Sherry was surprised that her mistress wanted to grow her own flowers. Immediately, she noticed that the Duke's fiancé took the flowers, after which they began to shine in her hands. After the girl touched them, the withered flowers became fresh again and full of energy. However, in addition to this, a very faint but still perceptible glow emanated from them. Only then did the heroine realize that the real villain was not trying to annoy her father. She was simply saving the flowers that were dying, thanks to which the heroine discovered a new ability. However, the effect of her abilities lasted very little, which annoyed our heroine. The girl thought that her strength lay elsewhere, so she asked the servant to lend her a hand. Schwer carefully took Sherry's hand in hers and tried to concentrate on her internal energy. After a while, she asked if the girl felt any changes. However, nothing happened without flowers, so the heroine thought that healing didn't work on people. The lady realized that she needed to keep trying to increase her power through flowers. So the girl decided not to put the flowers in a vase, but to plant them in the garden. However, the maid said that the ground in the north was so frozen that all the gardeners dissolved several years ago. However, the future duchess was not going to give up and suggested that they gradually start cultivating the land. The girl wanted to start doing this immediately, but the maid noted that it was already late and that she should get ready to go to sleep. The next day, the irritated head of the knights, John, came for an audience with the duke's fiancé. The girl was lying in her bed, and the maid was applying a mask of fresh cucumbers to her. The knight was very annoyed because he was forced to climb through the snow to find flowers. Sherry was not happy because her mistress kept moving constantly, causing the cucumber mask to fall off repeatedly. In fact, the girl was very excited to be able to participate in the meeting about punitive expeditions. She asked John if they would be allowed to place a vase of flowers on the meeting room table. The man became irritated by her question and asked what kind of terrible flowers she wanted to use. However, he immediately recognized the flowers as very beautiful and agreed to put them on the table after learning that the Duke had given them to her. The fiancée assumed that her maid had started preparations because she knew about the meeting in advance. Thanks to Sherry, she learned that this was a meeting where heads of families from the entire region gathered. Most of the monsters attack from the north, but there are some that roam the rest of the territories. So she advised her mistress to look confident and impress the owner of the magic tower. Some time later, the Duke was working in his office and his fiancée was sitting watching him. The girl asked him if he liked the pen she gave him. The man didn't want to lie, so he honestly admitted that its length didn't suit him. After this, the girl admitted that in addition to the pen, she also ordered a new chest of drawers. Time passed quickly during the conversation, and now it was time to go to the meeting. The Duke took his fiancée's hand, which caused her indescribable delight. Reynald warned that he would not stay to accompany the fiancée if she behaved so badly. After that, he carefully took the girl's hand and helped her get up from her seat, after which they went to the meeting together to be present at the discussion. They were holding hands, so Schwer wanted this time to last as long as possible. On the way to the meeting, they met a butler who announced the arrival of the great mage. He also told his mistress that all her instructions regarding the preparation of garden tools had been followed. The girl told her future husband that she had bought several tools, because there was almost nothing in the palace. Around the corner, they were cheerfully greeted by several knights who were very happy to see the future mistress. They admitted that, during the break between training sessions, they were busy building the fence the girl had asked them to build. The Duke noticed how well his future wife communicated with all his subordinates. The lady admitted that these were the knights who had previously guarded her room, so she asked them for help. As a thank you, the girl asked her future husband to call the boys by name the next time they met. After this, Nigel immediately contacted them and admitted that the new fence looked great. The Duke became increasingly irritable as they ran into more and more people on the way who distracted them from their work. The first thing the Duke did during the meeting was to introduce his companion as the future Grand Duchess. Silence reigned at the table, because those present did not expect such a rapid development of events. The master of the magic tower, Riley, responsible for sending mages and magic stones, expressed doubts about the girl's well-being. He considered that the marriage was imposed by the Marquis, and it would be very difficult for the young woman to be in the north. All mages on the continents are subordinate to the magic tower, and only the supreme mage can provide mages. In other words, Riley helps find and kill monsters, provides magic stones for the northern expedition, and he is a key figure in the duchy's long-term plans. The boy expressed doubts about how well the girl would cope with her responsibilities. Schwer knew that the boy looked young only at first glance. In fact, it was impossible to know his age. Out of emotion, the girl pulled John's uniform, which he didn't like very much. The lady hoped to stand out in front of the very pale knight. However, here the Duke defended her and said that their marriage was by mutual agreement. In addition, Reynald became interested when the mage started walking around his estate and taking an interest in the dug-up garden, to which Riley replied that he was attracted by the faint magic emanating from the garden. After this, the men began to discuss whether more mages should be provided to support the military units. At this point, the Marquis of the Northwestern region and head of the family, Charlie Henner, entered the conversation. He was supported by the Baron of the Northeastern lands, Arthur Smith, who also expressed concern about the Duke's loss of emotion. In addition, The man was interested in the fact that there was a vase with flowers on the meeting room table. The heroine admitted that this was a gift from the Duke, which he presented to her from his last campaign. The Baron noticed that this branch had been torn from his garden and asked about the girl's past. The man was happy that after this wedding, two great swordsman families united. The Baron's lands were quite far from the rest, so he didn't know yet that the girl had renounced her family, and she would not inherit it. The heroine decided to correct this oversight and said directly that she was not the heir to her family. She admitted that she is the eldest in her family, but the Duke interests her much more. She was happy to be able to move to the north and be with her husband, so she asked to be called by her new surname. At that moment, the Duke addressed his fiancée by her first name for the first time. The girl was so surprised that she completely forgot that she was in an official meeting. After this, the Duke and the Duchess began to show mercy, which led the young mage to discouragement. The Duke immediately decided to point out that this marriage would not become a union of families, and that the Netris would not help with expeditions. The Baron apologized for his behavior, but thought that in that case, this marriage would be useless. The lady forgave him for this mistake, because thanks to it, the Duke called her by name for the first time. The Marquis noted that during the Duke's absence on expeditions, his region was invaded by several monsters. According to him, Schwer guessed that the facts of the novel began to gradually come true. Although there were many monsters, they did not represent a critical level of danger. Although even in the original, the main characters realized the danger of the North only after the attack on the central region. However, Schwer knew that she could not rely on them, judging by the events of the original novel. The Marquis insisted that it was necessary to at least try to establish some connections with the center, to which the Duchess remarked that after so long, even if they sent some help, those people would not know the North better than the Duke. The girl noted that she understood this like no one else, because her family was always only involved in the affairs of the center. Their support will not help much, because the meeting between the Duke and Irina could not be allowed. The man fell in love with her at first sight, but after their wedding, she lost all her feelings forever. If Irina arrives, then we urgently need to help the Duke recover his emotions before their meeting so that he can make informed decisions. The girl was worried that the Duke would go on an expedition and be absent for a long time. However, John said that he had prepared bouquets of flowers in advance and had already delivered them all. Mage Riley was interested in how Reynald planned to get rid of the year-long buildup of monsters in one trip. He pointed out that in the future, the Duchess would be angry if she had to postpone the marriage registration. The Duke listened to his words and noticed the annoying sugar next to him. After that, he took a deep breath and realized that he would have to take his wishes into account. It was the first time Riley saw the Duke so exhausted and felt a strange energy coming from the garden. Therefore, he promised that once the expedition was over, he would take care of the North and allow them to go to the center. He explained this by saying that he himself was tired of constantly sitting in the tower. The Duchess immediately began to thank him for allowing them to be together. The girl asked the mage how long they would have to rest. However, she realized that 1 week would not be enough to relax and deal with the garden magic. She admitted that she was going to grow even more different plants. After this, the mage agreed to 2 weeks of rest, but the Duchess insisted on 3. She was very happy when the mage finally agreed to give them a whole 4 weeks. After this, the Duke proposed to consider this meeting and end the meeting. Everyone began to prepare and went for a walk around the estate. First of all, our heroine went to look at the fence the knights had built for her. It was very beautiful and looked strong enough to stand on its own. Just then, the knights approached with boxes of equipment in their hands. They asked the new lady if she liked their wooden fence. The girl admitted that they did even better than she imagined. They also brought the Duke's wooden sword from his fight with John, which they had asked for. One of the knights admitted that he took it immediately after the battle. So this is the one. The maid noted that manual labor takes a lot of time, so her furniture will arrive a little later. At that moment, the knights finished installing the fence and asked if more help was needed. The girl admitted that she wanted to put the Duke's first gift there to keep it. She asked the knights to tell her the story of how their future husband conducted expeditions. And at that moment, he was sitting in his office busy with government affairs. The mage leaned back on the sofa and talked about the character the future Duchess had. Reynald noted that this strange girl was not shy at all. The mage found it strange that the Duke ended the next meeting so quickly, so he asked when they were going on an expedition. Reynald wondered why the mage was sitting in his office and not going to his house. Riley admitted that he had simply decided to wait here, since he would be taking care of the garden anyway. The Duke called this suspicious, because normally the mage likes to sit in his tower and not go anywhere. However, he noted that he made an exception due to the magical energy of the garden. After this, the Duke realized that it was useless to argue with the mage. Suddenly, Riley had some kind of guess, so he turned to the man in a very soft voice and affectionate. He decided to check if the Grand Duke of the North had returned to his emotions. After that, the boy used the magic circle and went to the future Duchess, because it was more interesting with her. A sudden gust of wind scattered all the papers and left a mess after he left. The Duke was also annoyed, because he heard conversations on the street between the knights and his future wife. Schwer continued to cultivate the garden and install a fence for the camellias. The girl didn't realize at all at what moment the mage was next to her. He admitted that he felt a strange magical energy, so he came to take a look. Riley noticed that it came from a small camellia branch that was stuck in the ground. Although the flow of energy itself was very weak, it could still be clearly felt. Therefore, the future Duchess pretended that she was just working on the fence. She invited the mage to inspect anything except this spot, although there was nothing else. But the girl was very interested to know if the mage had magic stones that controlled the temperature. She explained that she would need the stones to grow trees in the garden. The mage commented that he would like to receive something in return for his help. After all, temperature-controlling magic stones are indeed very rare. Schwer knew that not everyone could make a magic stone and that their number was limited. There are even fewer people who can give power to these stones. But this does not apply to the master of the magic tower. The girl noticed that her family's flowers were quite famous throughout the empire. Therefore, she offered to give her first flowers to the mage in exchange for help. She knew that Riley didn't believe her, so she asked to see the camellia she had planted. She demonstrated that the flower she planted now should take root in the northern soil. The mage was sure that the family's power was inherited by Netri's younger sister. The future Duchess asked not to pretend, because she knew that the mage perfectly feels his own strength. She said that the camellia planted by her hands glows even at night. The girl suggested consulting the maid if the mage didn't trust her. Riley thought for a moment and agreed to give the necessary magic stones in exchange for flowers. Immediately after this, the girl grabbed the boy's hands and began to thank him for his help. She said she was afraid of losing the Duke's first gift, so his help was especially important. The boy was unusual in this behavior, so he moved his hand away. Schwer asked the mage to handle camellia carefully, because it was the Duke's first gift. She allowed the mage to take care of the flowers as much as he wanted, while she dealt with her business. Riley noticed that any conversation with the girl started and ended with the Duke. Even he noticed that the girl's affection for Reynald was reaching its limit. However, the boy did not know if these feelings could be considered a manifestation of true love. After that, he carefully examined the camellia again and created a magic circle for movement. The boy found it quite interesting that two sisters inherited the power in this generation. Meanwhile, our heroine was running around the estate and ignoring all requests from her servants. The girl ran to her room and saw new flowers there. Right by the rock in front of the entrance to the huge chambers, she met Knight John. The man carefully opened the door to the girl's room, and she immediately felt a floral scent. There, in the middle of the room in front of the entrance, stood the Duke, surrounded by hundreds of flowers. He realized that the girl was already very late for the meeting he had promised her. This sight was so beautiful that Schwer couldn't say a word. The Duke did not expect Riley to agree to take care of the North, so he ordered many flowers to be prepared. Our heroine looked at a large number of flowers and worried about how much emotion her future husband would need. Originally, the Duke expected it to be for a month, but with the help of a mage it could take a week. And the girl herself helped him a lot to face the dark energy. The heroine asked her future husband to take a small step to the left, then pick up one of the hundreds of bouquets of flowers and turn around at 9 o'clock. The Duke couldn't believe that the girl asked him to bring her flowers just for that reason. But the Duchess was delighted with this perfect combination of black and red. Reynald did not expect such a reaction from the girl, so he simply remained silent. The heroine was happy that after receiving the magic stones, her gardening went uphill. The Duke was surprised that the mage agreed to give him magic stones so easily. Before the girl had time to answer, a magic circle appeared behind her in the air. The next second, something fell from the ceiling and landed right among the flowers. It turned out to be the young mage from the tower, who fell straight onto the floor. The Duke and the Duchess did not expect to see a boy here, so they were very surprised. What worried the girl the most was that the mage would fall directly onto her flowers. She started crying because the boy broke some flowers that the Duke had given her. She valued his gift very much. She even prepared an album to wrap the bouquets. The mage was surprised that a man who invested in mathematical stones collected ordinary paper. The girl literally sobbed and asked the mage to return the paper to its original state. After that, the girl asked why Riley arrived at this place so early. In fact, she wanted to receive the camellia flowers that were on the table during the meeting. The mage was annoyed that the Duke's document was more important to her than he was. The Duke did not want the girl to cry, so he took the handkerchief out of his pocket. He quickly handed it to the redhead so she could wipe away her tears. Duke Reynald explained that he often uses this scarf, which pleased the girl. The man immediately guessed that the girl would want to take the handkerchief that had belonged to him for a long time. At first, she offered to exchange it for paper, but Reynald allowed her to keep everything. A little later, the Duke looked at the dark windows of his fiancée's room. John approached the owner and announced that they had already completed the preparations for the campaign. Schwer persistently chased the Duke all day, and the mage followed her. Reynald was glad that the girl had calmed down and should have gone to bed. Almost the same thing happened with Riley, who was also worried about the Duke. The man realized that since the day he met his fiancée, nothing had gone well. He realized that she was always in his sight, always in his thoughts, and it was better for her to be close than to suffer somewhere far away. Therefore, he replied that he had long been accustomed to this attitude towards himself. The remaining knights proudly greeted their commander before setting off on the expedition. The Duke remembered that the lady asked to name the knights by name as thanks. The boys immediately realized that all this happened thanks to their new mistress, and at that moment, she herself was peacefully dozing in her bed, surrounded by bouquets of flowers. The girl woke up the next morning with a magazine wrapper in her hands. Schwer immediately realized that Reynald had already fled to the expedition while she was sleeping. At that moment, the maid came and asked what she should do with the remaining flowers, to which the Duke and commented that she wanted to seat them and see what happened. Sherry couldn't believe it because there were too many flowers around her, even for a garden. However, our heroine was full of hope to make this garden come alive and bloom. Schwer asked her maid where the previous Grand Duchess was from. However, she said that this is a very old story, so it's better to ask the Duke himself. Everyone on the estate dearly loved their new mistress and tried to help her in everything. The girl wanted to familiarize herself with information about the North, so she asked the butler for reference materials. She wondered why the maids had such a strange reaction to this wish. The future Duchess said that she doesn't want to make any mistakes if she stays close to the Duke. With this, she managed to kill the butler, who had been waiting for this request for a long time. The man explained that he had to temporarily take care of the deceased Duchess's affairs. The girl was impressed that this man had seen the young Duke's childhood, and she immediately became interested in what kind of child he was, to look at his young portrait. Throughout this time, our heroine did not understand why the maids reacted this way to the fact that the butler decided to tell everything from the beginning. The man cleared his throat and quickly began to tell the history of the entire family, starting with its first representative. Meanwhile, in the northern mountains, during an expedition, John noticed that something was wrong with his master. The man suddenly felt uncomfortable, as if someone was arguing behind his back about him. However, he attributed this strange feeling to the close presence of monsters. Meanwhile, the butler continued the story, having already tired out all the maids. Schwer allowed all the girls to go out into the garden and not listen to his endless chatter. However, one of the two small daisies in her hands suddenly glowed and exploded. The girl accidentally used her power on a flower and didn't have time to react. Sherry asked the girl to be careful because she is the only mistress of the North in the Duke's absence. At that moment, our heroine looked out the window and noticed that the mage was standing right in the garden. So she gave the burnt daisy to her assistant and went downstairs. The girl dreamed so much of seeing the mage that she literally ran to meet him. However, from afar she noticed that the boy had suddenly become too tall. At the last moment, the man turned around and appeared before her with his most mature face. The Duchess was even paralyzed with surprise. She didn't expect to see him in such an unusual form. Riley scolded the girl for sneaking up on him too quietly and getting scared every time. A large number of stones cannot be created quickly, so the mage brought some pieces to start with. The Duchess was very satisfied with his help, so she immediately thanked him. The girl was very happy that she had decided to turn to this mage for help. As a token of gratitude, she wanted to give him one of her first daisies. However, the experienced mage immediately noticed that something was wrong with this flower. He managed to snatch the daisy from the girl's hands before the flower exploded. Schwer said that the Duke was going to wear white uniforms for their wedding, so she asked the mage to make an engraving stone. But then, the girl was distracted by the maid, who reported that all the remaining flowers had been brought to the garden. After that, our heroine thanked the mage again for his help and started working in the garden. At that moment, the Duke was fighting a huge monster on a cliff top. While using the sword energy, his emotions gradually disappeared completely. Some things irritated him terribly, but he couldn't survive without them, so he hated this skill of his. At the same time, work in the estate garden was in full swing. The young future Duchess commanded all the servants and knights, who unanimously planted flowers in different sectors. When the Duke returned from the expedition, the entire garden was already full of flowers. Now the girl sincerely understood the value of temperature magic stones. The mage couldn't believe he had to take off his robe in the north because of the heat. He even suggested that butterflies should appear soon. The girl valued her flowers very much and did not want to give them to the mage, but she assured herself that she would receive the Duke's registration in a white uniform. Schwer noticed that the flowers only excited Riley on his first day. However, she didn't understand why, in this case, the mage constantly came to her garden. At that moment from afar, the girl noticed several familiar knights. This could only mean that her future husband had finally returned home. Therefore, our heroine took off and ran to meet her future husband. However, he greeted her with a very cold and emotionless expression on his face. However, the girl had prepared for this characteristic of her Duke in advance. She proudly said that the garden would be clearly visible from the window of his office. The man immediately suspected that the girl was rummaging in his office and might have taken something. He turned out to be right, because our heroine took several things from the Duke for her collection. However, she reassured the boy by taking only a chair and some furniture. Schwer closed the Duke's eyes for a moment to give him a small surprise. Even Knight John was very surprised by the number of flowers growing in the north. The girl has already explained that she planted the flowers given to her by the Duke. The man took his hands off his eyes and said that he agreed to look at the garden. However, Schwer asked to see it through the window of his office. The Duke decided to listen to his fiancée and went to change his clothes. He was not impressed by the flowers. He had never been particularly interested in the garden. He realized that the girl wanted to show off the flowers and remain the same as before the expedition. This only meant that only the man himself had changed. He often saw, heard, and lived in a world to which he attached no special meaning. The man noticed that everything in his office was new, and his family crest hung everywhere. He didn't understand why the girl ordered him to go to the office and wait for her signal. Suddenly, a loud shout came from outside. It was Schwer calling Reynald from the street. The man looked out the window and saw the girl actively waving her hands at him. He thought that the girl was begging him in that way to buy her a new dress. However, he said that he was mistaken and that we should look at the big picture in general. The heroine got tired of hinting to him and directly told the Duke to look at the entire landscape. Only then did Reynald take his eyes off her face and look at the flower meadow below his window. The girl was having fun and dancing in a huge heart she made of planted flowers. At that moment, the Duke's heart began to beat faster. Something excited him. The girl even added that she wanted to put a statue of the Duke in the center and put a wreath of flowers on him. However, she wouldn't mind at all if the man did it himself. However, the Duke replied that the girl could do whatever she wanted anyway. He took a deep breath and laughed, seeing the world so colorful for the first time in a long time. Soon the day of departure to the center arrived. Riley and John came to say goodbye to the Duke and the Duchess. The mage joked that he looked small because they were taking advantage of the law prohibiting child labor. However, the Duke said that the mage was trying to pass himself off as small and manipulate others. In any case, Riley wished the future spouses a good time and relaxation. After that, the door of their carriage clicked shut and the carriage moved forward. The girl wondered if there was any place in the center where she could find historical information about the Duke's family. She explained that this would help her get to know her future husband better. She also asked Reynald to show her his childhood portrait at least once a year. However, she realized that she could find the necessary information in the central library. Originally, the Blaine family was located in the center, but due to expeditions, most of the family moved north when they gained independence through a treaty. After this, our heroine asked the Grand Duke to hold her hand. She promised that this would help her cope with all the problems in this world. The Duke decided to grant her request so that the girl would stop talking constantly and leave it behind. He extended his hand to her and allowed her to grab his palm tightly. Our heroine's palm looked very small in the context of her future husband's large palm. Schwer knew that Irina should have already been engaged to the crown prince. There was a period in the Netri family when none of the daughters had bloomed yet. At that time, Irina received many proposals from suitors. Everyone wanted to gain fame for their family and the great swordsman family. No one knew that the girl would become heiress, so she herself proposed marriage to the prince. She asked the prince to get engaged to her for 2 years and promised to demonstrate the sword energy during this time and make the empire so strong that no one would touch it with a finger. The first meeting of Irina and Duke Reynald once began with a handshake. That's why the girl wondered if the Duke felt anything special at that moment. However, she was annoyed that nothing happened and she couldn't replace the main character. However, Schwer still didn't understand why her sister was so sure that she would bloom in 2 years. It is unlikely that the power would have been transferred to her while the eldest daughter of the family was alive. The future spouses arrived at the center, and the girl immediately noticed that it was significantly different from the north. As soon as they got out of the carriage, a young man approached them and greeted the family. Our heroine immediately realized that the time for her first meeting with the prince had come. This was Simon Weymouth, the main character of the novel, the Crown Prince of the Empire, chosen by Irina and loved by the original Schwer. The prince explained that he was not warned at all that the Duke would not arrive alone. Reynald immediately introduced his fiancée to everyone present. Simon was very surprised that the eldest daughter of the Netri clan chose such a husband. The prince invited the couple to join the tea party, which they interrupted to greet them. The heroine didn't understand why the prince behaved as if he were seeing her for the first time. Although in the original, she knew his feelings. The Duke wanted to leave the tea party, but the prince noticed that the Marquis's daughter was there. Immediately after these words, the Duke changed his mind and offered to join the tea party for a while. The prince led the couple to the table and introduced them to the daughter of a friend of the Marquis. Brittany stood up and greeted the future spouses. She looked very much like her father. After that, the prince wanted to introduce her to another girl, but she decided to do it herself. It turned out to be the second commander of the Imperial Knights, Schwer's sister, Irina Netri. Duke Reynald carefully helped his fiancée sit down at the table and brought a chair behind her. Our heroine was surprised that the prince did not know that she had been excommunicated from her family. She realized that Simon didn't care at all, but her sister looked uncomfortable. The prince wanted to talk about the Duke's recent expedition, but he didn't know if it would be appropriate. He invited Irina to step aside and discuss swordsmen's matters separately, but the girl wanted to continue the conversation at the table. Our heroine hoped that they would still remain at the table and not leave them. However, the prince was very insistent, so Irina had to obey and get up from the table. Schwer immediately asked her future husband not to touch anyone with his hands until she gave him the engagement ring. The man noticed that the girl promised not to forbid him anything, but now she suddenly opposes her own words. The heroine noticed that the Duke recently took her hand for the first time, so she will get jealous. She blackmailed him by saying that she would start calling him kitten in public and embarrass him. After this, the girl immediately apologized to everyone present for being distracted by personal conversations. The prince admitted that he was very happy to see the Duke and the Duchess together. Our heroine looked at her husband, hoping that nothing bad would happen. At this point, Brittany said that she came to the tea party on her father's instructions. The girl noticed that it was she who gave the camellia branch because she thought it would be romantic. She also asked our heroine why she fell in love with the great Duke Reynald. Without thinking for a second, Schwer replied that she loved him for his tough side. Brittany was surprised how many positive things the girl could say about her future husband. She told us small things that no one would ever pay attention to. However, the heroine added that there are secret things that only she knows. For example, that her 13th eyelash is slightly longer than all the others. She laughed and said that she liked to observe the changes on his expressionless face. It was at that moment that the voice of the Duke, who had listened to the whole conversation, came from behind. He realized that his strong voice could be clearly heard even in the hallway. The girl now realized that the prince and the duke returned only together. Simon noted that his sister had work to do, but would join them later. The girl was very angry because they barely found an opportunity to come, and the prince wants to stay with the duke. However, it turned out that he was just joking and did not intend to force him to separate from his fiancée. Reynald noticed how quickly his fiancée's expression changed after these words. The prince noticed that everyone was eager for the arrival of the Blaine family, but he didn't dare to delay them. Schwer mentally thanked the prince for being able to participate in such an exciting preparation and fun for the banquet. In fact, the girl was happy that they were given a room for two. The duke commented that he sometimes had the impression that he was just her dressed-up doll. The man said that he likes to wear gloves because they are important for swordsmen, and they help prevent unnecessary cuts. He also hoped that this habit of his would not accidentally cause discomfort to his fiancée. But the girl really liked the way her future husband took care of himself and others. She was worried when she first came to the center, but now she will try to enjoy this day. The heroine suddenly smiled slyly and asked if she could see the duke's sleeping face. However, the man didn't have time to answer as they approached the hall, and they had to introduce themselves to everyone present. The girl noticed that she was excommunicated from the family and had to be introduced only by her name, but they called her old surname Netri. She immediately realized that this was done intentionally, and the reason was obvious. The exiled daughter of the southern family, Netri, returned as the Grand Duchess of the North. Blaine, some families might be angry if that position was held by a girl without a surname. Even now it is being discussed that not long ago the heroine imitated her sister, flirted with other men, and finally married the duke. The girl would have liked to receive the surname Blaine, but the banquet was held a day before the marriage certificate was approved. Therefore, our heroine was worried that everyone might consider her a deceiver. However, the duke didn't believe the rumors at all and relied only on what he saw with his own eyes. These words made our heroine very happy and relieved, as she was very worried about this. Schwer noticed that some people were looking at them from time to time. The heroine suggested that they could not greet the duke because of his presence. These were clearly trained knights and old acquaintances of her future husband, Reynald. At that moment, her younger sister, Irina, approached them and introduced herself as the second commander of the Imperial Knights. Schwer didn't understand at all why her own sister was reintroducing herself to her. Irina said that her father was worried that she would have to marry without a dowry. The heroine just laughed because her family sent her away empty-handed. And now she herself is asking this question. Irina was surprised that her older sister still had some kind of dowry. In fact, our heroine was not referring to money, but to the rooster she brought with her. Irina perfectly knew that her sister was lying and was going to tell the duke about it. However, at that moment, the elder interrupted her and told her that perhaps the duke would not stay by her side all the time, but chat with his friends. After that, the man started looking around and looking for the one she was talking about. Nearby, he noticed several knights who were looking at him with admiration. These were his old acquaintances from the royal guard, so the duke didn't mind talking to them. He apologized to his wife and sister and headed towards the knights. Irina thought that her older sister had one-sided love, but it didn't look like it at all. The girl thought to herself that she was in quite a strange situation. Schwer said that her husband was very handsome, but asked her not to stare at him. Irina didn't understand why her sister said that, so she asked her to speak directly. She said that she was engaged to Prince Simon, after which Schwer advised her not to come to the north. Irina wondered why her sister married the duke, because she wasn't interested in the north at all before. However, the sister only said that true love always comes unexpectedly. The duke was communicating with his familiar knights, but still watched his wife from afar. Schwer noticed this and sent him a sweetheart with her hands as a sign of her great love. Irina asked her sister to behave normally, because she still represents the Netri family. But our heroine wanted to anger her little sister, so she said that this was just a token of love. Then, Irina threatened that everything would end for her by moving to the north, while she herself would remain living in the center. After that, the girl turned around and returned to her company. She looked so angry that even her subordinates started asking the girl if she was okay. At that moment, Lady Brittany, accompanied by several girls, approached our heroine. Schwer was incredibly happy to see at least one familiar face at this event. the girls noticed from afar that the younger sister was very disrespectful when addressing the future Grand Duchess of the North. Brittany couldn't even believe that they believed the rumors about her kind nature. Schwer suggested forgetting about this oversight and asked to be introduced to new ladies. The first was the Duchess of the Central Region, Angela, who became interested in the girl after her father's story. Schwer was surprised that stories about her were already circulating in the Central Region. However, everything became clear after the girl told her maiden name. In fact, she turned out to be the daughter of a baron who was present at the meeting recently. The heroine noticed that the girl looked too young to be married and already had a teenage son. Next, they introduced the daughter of the Count of the Central Region, the sweet girl Sally. Angela confided in her that they had recently received an invitation from the Netri family. It seemed that Irina was trying to gather all the nobles of the capital around her. She received an offer from the prince, and in return promised to unite the nobles of the center, which were divided into 4 categories. The first supported the Netri family. The second studied the Blaine style, but lived in the capital. The third category included supporters of Crown Prince Simon himself. And the fourth consisted of neutrals, who did not support the previous 3 groups. But in reality, the neutrals did not support the influence of the Blaine family in the center, which remained even after the North gained independence. Therefore, the last category of people was the ideal prey for Irina. The invitation to meetings is a recruitment method, one of the steps towards the complete isolation of the North. Judging by the rumors, His Highness Saman was also supposed to participate. Angela pointed out that the imperial family has always tried to remain neutral, but Lady Irina's engagement is a cause for concern. She began to say something more about His Highness Saman, but suddenly interrupted him. In fact, Prince Saman himself at that moment approached the girls to greet them. He apologized for so rudely interfering in their conversation and scaring the girls. In fact, he wanted to talk to the Grand Duke, but he was too busy, so he wanted to tell his wife something about the Duke. In the original novel, the prince was a man who favored the North, and in return, he received some fencing advice from the Duke. However, all this was completely destroyed after they developed feelings for Irina. Schwer had no intention of breaking all ties with the capital, so she agreed to talk this time. She and the prince went out onto the balcony, but the girl still refused his offer to drink. After this, Simon asked if the girl liked being in the center. Schwer was happy to learn that she especially likes the climate of the center, which is ideal for her. The prince was still pretending that they were seeing each other for the first time, although he couldn't help but remember her, because the real Schwer was madly pursuing him in the original story. One day she found him in the garden while he was holding a watering can. That time, the prince even asked the girl to stop sneaking into the garden, taking advantage of her family's influence. In fact, she had heard that he was already engaged to her younger sister. Immediately afterward, in revenge, the girl threw an entire watering can with water over the prince's head. The man was very angry and asked her why she was behaving so badly towards him. At that moment, Schwer replied that she was just watering her flowers and it happened by accident. Therefore, the heroine wanted to nip all omissions in the bud and admitted that she had been excommunicated from her family. However, the prince had known this for a long time, which puzzled the young woman even more. He realized that many families were excluding their children due to marital problems, because in this world, arranged marriages were common. The girl was a little upset when she realized that the conversation would not be about the Grand Duke. She looked at him from the window and saw that he wasn't shaking anyone's hand, as he had promised. Schwer admitted that she changed a lot due to her love for Reynald. The prince admitted that this was true, judging by the way she constantly looked at the other man in his presence. Schwer didn't know how to interpret this. She even suggested that the prince was drunk. However, he just laughed and said that he never gets drunk on champagne. He realized that the girl was very clever and should have already guessed what she needed from her. The prince noted that Irina was only his closest ally, and nothing more and nothing less. After that, Schwer said that tomorrow she would become the official wife of the Duke. They even had a common room in the palace. However, the prince said that, according to rumors, if it concerned Irina's loved one, then the girl was willing to charm anyone, regardless of their gender, status and age. She remembered that she herself suggested that he meet from time to time, even if he was engaged to Irina. At that moment, the girl even came up with the idea to hit the prince on the head with something so that he would lose his memory. However, she just laughed and said that she sincerely loved the Duke, so everything else was in the past. The heroine no longer wanted to listen to this nonsense, so she turned around and wanted to leave the balcony. However, the prince remembered that the Duke was losing emotions and that the girl could not fill the abyss inside him forever. These words made her stop and look closely at her future husband. The prince noted that feelings did not last long and that the Duke would be quite useless without the power of his sword. He even invited the girl to stand on the right side, but she replied that she would always be next to her husband. She realized that thanks to her, the Duke learned to frown and his appearance was exactly his type. After this, Schwer stopped hiding and directly replied that she would always belong to her husband's side. The prince blocked her exit from the balcony to the corridor with his hand and burst into uncontrollable laughter. This reaction was very atypical, so the heroine did not know what would happen next. The prince apologized to the girl and told her that he just wanted to check with what intentions she was approaching the Duke. This angered our heroine a little, because this whole situation was unpleasant. Seeing this, Simon apologized to the girl again for everything that happened. He asked for this to be considered some kind of test, because he was also worried about the Duke. After that, Schwer calmed down a little and said goodbye to the crown prince. She went straight to her husband and noticed that many people were avoiding her because of Schwer's original past. However, she decided to ignore this and asked the Duke to buy her an engagement ring. She said she would like to see a beautiful, large, prominent ring on her finger. However, due to his work, the Duke would feel uncomfortable with it, so something else had to be figured out. The man looked at his wife's happy face and promised that he would definitely come up with something. Lately, for some reason, he liked it more and more when a girl smiled widely. After that, he asked the knights not to worry the Duke too much and return him to his safe place. Then the girl turned around and, very animated, ran off in the other direction. She returned to her friends and told them that she and the prince were just chatting. Our heroine's younger sister, Schwer Netri, watched the girls from afar. Schwer suggested changing the subject and asked where Angela found such a beautiful set. The girl said that this is a popular item in the center. Lovers engrave pictures of each other and carry them with them. After this, the heroine was inspired to make the same exchange of pendants with her husband. Angela added that some shameless people carve their secret lovers onto pendants. At that moment, Schwer remembered that in the center she could find information about the North and the Blaine family. She admitted that she had recently lived in the North, so she asked her friends to help her find information related to this. Sally strongly recommended that I visit the capital's library in my free time. Brittany noted that her friend loves to read, so she can suggest many interesting points. At that moment, the girls agreed that the next day they would visit the library together and have tea. Schwer noticed that her younger sister, Irina, was looking at her too clearly. She realized that some of the girls' companions were pointing at her and saying something. After that, Irina personally approached the girl and said that she wanted to talk to her. She remembered that she had asked her sister not to bother the prince or the people around her. Schwer noticed that the prince himself called her to the balcony, but the younger sister didn't believe it. She kept cursing because the girl was too self-confident, even though she couldn't even show the power of blooming. Irina said that she is one of the people she hates the most. Those who are capable of doing something only with words cannot offer even a drop of effort, and they only talk about their beliefs, but are not willing to defend them. And she especially hates people whose greed goes far beyond their capabilities. However, Schwer did not fall for the provocation, and noted that the girl's relationship with the prince was really not working out. Irina said that she couldn't be calm when she had an older sister who was trying to take everything from her. Although Schwer tried to say that she didn't need anyone except the Duke, Irina didn't believe it. Once again, she ordered her sister to be quiet and not interfere anywhere. And then she left. The Duke was talking with his knights, but he still saw this scene from afar. He realized that first Prince Simon and then Irina were taking his wife aside. Reynald noted that in the north, the girl was always surrounded by people, but in the center, she was completely alone. At this point, one of the knights told rumors that Schwer was known for approaching people and throwing them in the trash after using them. However, the Duke warned that if he heard those words again in the future, he would know who started everything. The knight tried to justify himself, but Reynald no longer listened to him at all. He approached his wife and suggested that she leave if she was already tired of the event. The girl was happy that her future husband showed her so much care and attention. After that, the boys left the ball and went to their room to rest. The Duke was working with documents when the heroine noticed that all his hands were covered with scars. She wondered at what age and when he got these scars. However, the Duke noted that the hands of any swordsman look more or less the same. The girl noticed that she would like to take revenge on every person who inflicted this wound on her. Reynald didn't pay much attention to her words and continued to work on the documents. Schwer tried to distract him from work, so she told him many interesting facts. The Duke explained that the number of monsters in the north had increased, but they didn't know the reason. At first it was assumed that this was due to the expedition break, but it turned out not to be the case. So the heroine realized that in the future, her husband would have to go to the mountains even more often. She remembered the prince's words, that he could not fill the abyss inside him forever. So she asked what happened to the Duke's predecessors when they lost all their emotions. The man didn't want to lie, and honestly replied that they all died shortly after. This was the rule of the Blaine family. Because without emotions, a person is unable to distinguish between good and evil, allies and enemies. At that moment, the head of the clan had to go deep into the northern mountains and take as many monsters as possible to the other world. Only then did the girl realize that his death was called retirement because he himself chose it in the novel. If there is no ready heir, then control passes to the Grand Duchess, and she temporarily takes the position until the heir can firmly hold the sword in his hands. Now the girl understood Schwer's words that she must look strong. However, the Duke noticed that his emotions were returning, so they have a chance to ask Riley for help. At that moment, the heroine made the final decision to awaken her power in this life. No matter what, she began to ask the Duke at what point he began to lose his emotions, and why this happened. The man explained that the emotions burned and faded until almost nothing was left. The first mass was lost so long ago that he only remembers the fact itself, but he doesn't remember anything from that time. The girl feared that after a while the Duke would get used to her, and she would also stop evoking emotions in him. The Duke suggested that she not bother with this and go to bed first, because he still needed to work. Schwer was annoyed because she hoped to engrave the Duke's sleeping face on the engraving stone. However, she asked him not to look at her like that and better go to bed. He still didn't understand why the girl needed to see his sleeping face and why she was so annoyed. In fact, the heroine wanted to know even the most trivial things about the person she loves. That's why she even suggested that the Duke pretend to be asleep for a while. She pretended that she was afraid to sleep alone to convince him to do so. The Duke couldn't find the strength to oppose this proposal because he was very surprised. He did not react to this proposal, so the girl was embarrassed and apologized. She collapsed face up on the pillow and said that she hated his workaholic side. The Duke noticed that she was behaving like a small child, so the maids had more work to do. At this point, Schwer said that she wanted to get a pendant with the Duke's face engraved. The girl was inspired when she noticed that her husband didn't deny it to her. After this, the Duke relented and promised to go to bed and finish the work the next day. They turned off the light in their room and carefully lay down on the bed. The man looked at his wife and didn't understand why she was behaving so strangely. The girl admitted that she cannot sleep alone, but she also cannot sleep when her husband is by her side. Everything seemed like a real dream to her, because when she saw the Duke, she thought all this was unreal. Instinctively, the girl raised her left hand and extended it slightly forward. She gently touched the Duke with her hand and gently stroked his face. The man stopped these unexpected touches and grabbed her by the wrist. Schwer didn't understand why the Duke was acting so strangely and asked him about it. Reynald carefully closed the girl's eyes and told her to go to sleep quickly. At the same time, he gently stroked her forehead and was in no hurry to remove his hand from her face. Schwer asked him to keep his hand in the same place so that she could fall asleep faster. Rough feelings, rough movements, everything about the great Duke seems uncomfortable, but it brings peace to the girl. Only thanks to this, she could fall asleep quickly and rest before the big day. After this, the Duke carefully removed his hand from the girl's face and noticed that she was very loud. He again looked closely at his hand, which was all covered in scars. The man didn't understand what she saw in that hand to show so much interest. The next morning, the Duke woke up earlier than the girl, who was still lying in bed. She jumped up, thinking that she could finally look at the Duke's sleeping face. However, she looked around and realized that her husband was not in bed with her. The girl even thought she had dreamed it all, so she decided to observe the wonderful dream. However, she didn't hear the Duke's voice next to her, so she opened her eyes again. The girl quickly sat upright in bed and saw that her husband was changing his clothes. He had a lot to do in the morning, so he had no free time. He sincerely apologized for accidentally waking up his wife while getting ready. The girl wished him a good day and a great training session with a smile on her face. Just before leaving, Reynald reminded them that their marriage registration ends today. Therefore, he congratulated Schwer on becoming the Grand Duchess of Schwer Blaine from this moment on. After that, Reynald hurriedly left the room and closed the door behind him. Our heroine was still in shock from what she heard and could not move. After that, she was immediately delighted with how well her name matched, and her new surname. The maid reported that Angela had sent her an official invitation to a tea party. The maid was very careful with the girl because she had heard terrible rumors about her. However, the Duchess just said that she wanted to get back the blanket and pillow she slept on. After this, Sally and our heroine went to the central library together. There the girl presented herself publicly for the first time with her new first and last name. The librarian showed them the direction where all the books about the North are kept. The section they needed contained a large amount of books and information. The Duchess said that she had read almost all the books, so she could help you find something specific. She suggested that they start by reading the scriptures that spoke about the origins of the Blaine family. The Vermouth family was founded by a messenger of God. That is why the country is closely connected with the temple. A long time ago, a period of turmoil began on the continent. There were no leaders or countries, so people and monsters coexisted. Humanity, which barely survived, had no rules or morals, and in the middle of this house, a new axis of power was born. The Nedris believed that people could change for the better, so they protected them from monsters. Blaine mercilessly punished everyone who broke the rules. Two forces, whose principles were opposite, constantly clashed with each other. That's why Vermouth appeared, who became an intermediary between them. The conflict only worsened, so God gave the Netri family the power to protect others. Blaine received the power of submission and punishment, and Vermouth left predictions on 5 tablets. Together with 2 families, he founded an empire, and the power granted by God is now called the family sword. It seemed strange to the girl that Blaine didn't even have the ability to protect himself. Unlike Netri, Sally saw the sad expression on the girl's face and worried that she had done something wrong. However, the heroine immediately smiled and asked if she could give her something else to read. The girl wanted to try every way to save the Duke, instead of regretting not having tried anything. After this, the girls went to a tea party, where Angela officially congratulated our heroine on registering her marriage. There was a festive atmosphere at the table when the butler brought flowers for Schwer. The servant announced that it was a bouquet from His Grace Duke Reynald. The girl was happy that her husband kept his promise and sent her flowers. The girls at the table noticed that the ribbon on the bouquet was more expensive than the flowers themselves. They explained that this is an expensive fabric used to make clothes. Schwer was surprised, since in the north he only gave flowers, but here he even tied them with a ribbon. By evening, the girl returned to the palace to attend the next ball with her husband. She wondered why the man had another bouquet in his hands. However, the Duke warned that he did not give her a bouquet today, although he promised to do so. Then Schwer said that a bouquet from the Duke was brought to her during tea time this afternoon. The girl wondered who, in this case, sent her these flowers without a note. She even suggested at one point that it could be Riley or John. At that moment, the doors opened, and His Grace the Duke of Blaine and his wife, the Duchess of Blaine, were introduced to everyone present. At that moment, Riley was sitting on the bare floor and couldn't understand why our heroine couldn't get him out of her head. Next to him were a butler and a maid, contemplating the huge statue of the Duke. They decided on the best place to put the statue until the owners returned. Riley did not approve of such obvious admiration for the human body at all. Although he said he would monitor the north, it was not necessary. The entire garden was covered by the Duchess's magic, and it was truly amazing. Unlike dark magic, sacred powers and magic do not require sacrifice. However, Blaine's swords are different. Although they use the same magic and swordsmanship skills, the result is completely different from Netri's. Schwer mentioned that her little sister had bloomed, but for some reason, her own magic was very similar to sword energy. Riley decided to monitor the Duke because he received his power at the wrong time. But suddenly, something scared the mage so much that he dropped the flower from his hands. He turned around and saw a rooster next to him, in whose beak there was a black flower. The boy was annoyed that he might be afraid of some pathetic animal. Meanwhile, in the central part, John congratulated his knights on their official wedding. The man explained that he was visiting his brother at the training ground. which is why he was absent from the last ball. He was glad that the girl received a bouquet of flowers, and their efforts were not in vain. At that very moment, the girl was called by her friends Brittany and Angela. It looked as if they were planning some kind of prank and were ready to act. The heroine asked the Duke to chat with someone else and leave her alone for a while. He was interested in this behavior of his wife, but decided not to interfere. The man noticed that he had something to do in the near future. In reality, all this was a distraction for Angela to present the cake. Then, Schwer grabbed her husband's hand and led him to the center of the hall. The girl approached the cake and officially congratulated the Duke on his marriage. It was a cute cake with a heart, a lit candle, and their names written on it. Schwer and Duke Reynald leaned over the cake together and blew out the candle. Immediately after this, the girl snatched a flower from her bouquet and decided to show off her gift. She smiled and quickly threw a delicate pink flower into the air. Immediately after this, the entire hall was filled with 1,000 falling petals. Rumors spread that Netri had been lied to when they were told that only the younger sister had inherited the power of the flower. Reynald watched attentively what was happening and suggested cutting the cake into pieces. The girl agreed to this, but asked not to break her heart in the center. Since this is a symbol of their love, the part where the heart ends should have been cut. The Duke was surprised by such a request and said that even cutting a cake was quite a task. At that moment, the prince approached them and began to applaud loudly, congratulating them on their wedding. He was very happy to be able to personally congratulate his friend on this event. However, something in his appearance especially caught the attention of our heroine. The girl noticed that the ribbon on His Highness, the Crown Prince, looked familiar to her. She remembered that her bouquet had recently been tied with exactly the same ribbon. That's why our heroine assumed that this was the official film of the Central Region. The prince leaned towards Schwer and asked for her hand as a formal greeting. However, Schwer put her hands behind her back and pretended that she didn't have them. The prince did not expect such a reaction at all, so he did not know how to react to it. The entire hall fell silent as everyone waited for Simon's reaction. After this, the girl said that her own husband should greet her first. Reynald took the girl's hand, carefully brought it to his lips, and kissed it tenderly. All this time, the prince remained with his extended hand and waited for his turn. At that moment, our heroine's father approached the company and said that it was very rude of her not to respond to the prince's greeting. He approached the girl from behind and put his hand on her shoulder. Instead of greeting, he immediately began to scold her for the fact that the girl was not following etiquette. However, Schwer was far from shy, so she bravely pushed her father's hand off her shoulder. She cheerfully noted that the people of the Netri family had absolutely no manners. Jokingly, she apologized to her father for such behavior and promised to send him a bouquet as an apology. After this, she asked the maid to take this bouquet to the room and bring the one that was already there instead. The father laughed and said that the spouses have a pretty good relationship, since this is how they congratulate each other. The girl looked at her younger sister and didn't understand why Irina hadn't said a word yet. At that moment, the Duke was communicating with the prince about work matters and discussing the affairs of the north. The prince recalled that the duchy is still part of the Burmu Empire. The Duke remembered that the agreement was concluded by the previous generation, so they, as descendants, will inherit and continue it. After this, the prince promised his support and offered to ask for help if necessary. This sounded like a token of concern, but in reality, it was only an expression of imperial duty. Schwer no longer wanted to talk about politics, so she took her husband's hand and confessed her love to him. She asked her husband to eat the piece of cake that had her name written on it. The Duke immediately carefully grabbed the glove with his teeth and took it off her hand, after which he carefully removed the girl's name from the cake with his finger, and then licked the cream off his fingers and asked if she was satisfied. This sight almost made the girl's heart stop. She demanded gloves as a gift. The Duke had already accepted her antics, so he silently agreed to give them to her. The assembled people talked among themselves and discussed the behavior of the Duke and Duchess. Suddenly, our heroine unceremoniously interrupted the conversation and offered to try a cake. She walked down the aisle and offered a gift to everyone present. At the same time, the girl initiated casual conversation with each of the guests and smiled cheerfully. Reynald watched from afar as his wife chatted pleasantly with the guests. Schwer noticed that he was looking at her, so she waved her hand. She apologized to her interlocutors and asked permission to go to her husband for a while. After this ball, people started whispering that the girl was very different from the rumored image. The heroine ran to her husband and asked why he was looking at her so attentively. Just at that moment, the maid returned and brought the bouquet that was sent to the girl during the tea party. Even the Duke noticed that the ribbon it was tied with was similar to the ribbon of His Highness the Prince. Schwer noticed that she loves flowers, but only him, so she will return the bouquet to the sender. After that, she walked towards Prince Simon and Irina, who were talking among themselves. Schwer took her bouquet in her hands and handed it to the crown prince. She said that she was giving this bouquet as an apology, as she had promised before. With surprise on her face, our heroine noticed that this bouquet suited the prince better than herself. The girl expected Irina to undoubtedly recognize the ribbon this bouquet was tied with. Angela even mentioned earlier that such ribbons are used in the imperial court as a sign of secret relationships. The younger sister immediately noticed the similarity and noticed that the girl quickly found a similar ribbon. However, the older sister said that she would only return the bouquet that the prince had recently given her. Simon immediately started making excuses, saying that the ribbon had no subtext, and he sent the flowers as congratulations. At that moment, the Duke approached and said that the girl accepted the flowers because she thought they were from him. The prince admitted his mistake, but still hoped that the girl could accept his gift. However, she insisted on her own and noted that she does not accept flowers if they are not from her husband. So she was glad to have found the rightful owner and returned it to him. The prince also started making excuses and said that he was not so stupid as to betray his friend and be carried away by his wife. He promised that he would investigate this matter and find out who tied his ribbon to this bouquet. Schwer could not completely trust the prince, but she also could not openly oppose him, because she hoped that it would become a bond connecting the north and the center. The rest of the evening went well, with all the guests relaxing and chatting among themselves. Before going to bed, while the maid was combing the girl, she told her about the incident with the bouquet. And the prince, this was very strange, because in reality the palace hides the sender of the flowers only if he deliberately does not want to give himself away. If the prince was telling the truth, then there were too many suspects in this matter. But this only proved how strong they were, because no one attacks the weak from behind. At that moment, Reynald returned and asked the maid to leave and leave him alone with his wife. The girl promised that today she would definitely put her husband to bed, and the Duke immediately thought that he had put something in her drink, or mixed it with her cake. The girl pointed out that she would never do this to someone she loves. Instead, she patiently watched her husband and waited for him to finally undress. The Duke ordered the girl to turn around and not look at him changing clothes. He even pulled his shirt over her head, just so the girl wouldn't look at him. Our heroine immediately hugged him and began to smell her husband's wonderful scent. The Duke tried to take his shirt back because he didn't want her to lose it. He tried to take it off the girl, but she didn't want to let go of the clothes. The Duke promised to give her something in return after returning to the north, because he needed it in the capital. Schwer promised that she would return it in the morning, but for now, she wrapped herself completely in it. The girl was worried that her conversation with the prince would ruin the banquet. However, the Duke pointed out that the situation is better now than ever before. Schwer noticed that her husband's uniform suited him very well, but she still didn't let him leave. After that, the girl asked what Reynald's plans for tomorrow would be. He started searching his shirt pockets, hoping to find some kind of scarf or something else there. The heroine admitted that she likes the center, but she really misses her husband's attention. She expressed her wishes that the man spend more time with her. The Duke said that he and the prince had agreed that they would not interfere in each other's internal affairs. If he breaks this promise, the prince will gain power over all expeditions, and Riley will be replaced by his mage. Schwer remembered that in the original, the main character, the prince, was not at all interested in the north. If she hadn't interfered with the Duke's emotions, he would have asked the center for help. As in the novel, the girl thought that she didn't want her husband to bow his head to anyone. She continued to listen to her husband, but at that moment, she gradually fell asleep. She still tried to stay awake longer and spend time with her husband. However, the Duke immediately realized how tired the girl really was. Schwer felt the Duke's hand, brought it to her face, and immediately fell asleep. Some time later, when the girl was already asleep, Reynald kept looking at her. He never took his hand off the girl and simply continued to sit next to her. He silently examined his fiancée and tried to study her as best as possible. The three founding families of the empire, Vermouth, Blaine, and Netri, lived in harmony until the imperial family began to control the other two. The engagement with Irina, support in conquering the north, became the support for all this. However, Simon was the only one who opposed the action of the imperial family. But everything suddenly changed after an engagement with one of the Netri sisters. The Duke could not get the incident with the ribbon on the bouquet out of his head. He was pulled out of his thoughts by a slight movement next to him and the sob of a girl. She smiled in her sleep and seemed to be dreaming of something very good. The man calmly continued to observe his young wife and think. The next morning, John entered their room and found the Duke looking for documents. The man ordered his assistant to find the best and most beautiful engraved ring. John was disappointed that he was woken up so early in the morning for something so small. Reynald continued to describe the ring he wanted to find for his wife. John had no choice but to obey and go in search of what was needed. After some time, our heroine woke up and immediately saw the Duke in front of her. She considered this a good sign and was glad that her day would be a success. As promised, the girl took off the Duke's shirt and returned it to him. After that, she changed her clothes and was about to leave her room when she noticed flowers. It was the Duke who brought his wife the promised bouquet of flowers for every training session. He explained that she could use the local training ground as much as she wanted in the north. The Duke noticed that Jim, the chief captain of the Knights, Irina's close associate, and John's brother, was now in charge there. The man immediately began to worry about why the Duchess was asking so many details about his brother. They continued to discuss as they gradually made their way to the training ground. The boys were walking down the castle corridor when they heard other people whispering something to each other. The girl asked her husband what was going on, but he didn't know either. Schwer was surprised, because in the original story, nothing should have happened now. After some time, the company reached the training ground and all the knights began to greet them. Jim approached separately and greeted each of the newcomers. He admitted that John often complained about the girl, which is why he knows her quite well. Jim was even surprised that the girl did not scold her brother. He joked that it was possible to complain about her, but the first time he complained about the Duke, he would not lose his mind. Jim laughed and said it was just a greeting joke. After this, our heroine asked to be shown the most suitable place to watch the training. The knight immediately suggested positioning herself near the center of the training ground. Immediately, a chair was brought to the girl, and they apologized for not being able to find anything more comfortable. The Duke was worried that the girl would watch his training and worry. However, Schwer noticed that she really wanted to see her husband up close during training. Immediately after this, the Duke ordered the knights to protect the girl, and he himself went to conduct the training. The girl noticed that she really liked the training, especially its leader. She watched him even more closely than the knight who had come to learn. The girl literally caught every movement of her husband with her eyes and tried to remember it as best as possible. She asked the name of the knight guarding her and continued to talk to him. She explained that she liked the Duke, so it was a pleasure for her to observe him. However, the girl noticed that there was a strange atmosphere around and asked if something strange was happening. The knight explained that an envoy from the palace visited their training ground this morning, which is why there is so much chaos. Schwer realized that she would need to find out what was happening after the Duke finished training. The man periodically got distracted from the battles and watched his wife, who was chatting pleasantly with the knight. He didn't understand what funny things this boy was telling that could make the girl laugh. Because of these thoughts, the man got distracted and accidentally injured his opponent. He immediately approached the boy to check on his well-being and help him if something happened. The man didn't even have time to take a step when the Duchess immediately flew towards Reynald and began to examine him all over. I realized that knights, especially imperial ones, often get injured. However, she didn't like the fact that if they were injured so easily, the North would soon come to an end. As soon as she finished speaking, Schwer immediately approached her chair and brought a bouquet of flowers from there. The girl cautiously approached the victim, despite the warning from the other knights. She carefully took out one of the daisies from the morning bouquet given to her by the Duke. The girl concentrated and tried to pour as much of her power as possible into this flower. She took a couple of steps forward and handed the daisy to the wounded knight. The man commented that he did not deserve to receive a flower from such a high-ranking person. However, Schwer did not ask him to accept it, but simply to take it in his hand and hold it for a while. The knights behind him began to whisper that this knight had received more attention from the Duke. They even suggested that they had a secret connection when the wounded man suddenly exclaimed. Thanks to the power of this flower, the knight's wounds began to heal, and all his pain suddenly disappeared. However, the girl noticed that this is only a temporary solution, so he definitely needs to see a doctor and check his hand. After that, she returned to her husband and began to beg him for compliments. The Duke really appreciated her work and praised the girl for her attention. However, as thanks, his wife demanded his consent to eat several desserts together. At the same time, in the north, the mage continued to fight monsters and protect the territory. It was only during the expedition, because his magic allowed him to effectively shoot monsters. The mage couldn't even imagine the wealth and honor that awaited him if he captured the north. Suddenly, a small pebble flew out of one of the magic portals. It appeared right where the demon died, so it was an unusual stone. The mage took it in his hand and immediately felt a strange energy coming from it. The next day, our heroine went shopping with her friends and maids. The Duchess sent her maid to rest for a few hours while they had tea and enjoyed desserts. The girl tried to refuse, but Schwer gave her some money and then, literally, forced her to go rest. The more the friends looked at the Duchess, the more it seemed to them that all the rumors were lies. Schwer overheard their words and asked what kind of rumors they were talking about. And then the girl laughed and said that all these rumors were complete fiction and had nothing to do with the truth. She asked to be informed about the representatives of the temple who arrived at the palace this morning. At that moment, the girl learned that they had found the second magic engraving stone. A little later that night, Xu returned to her room and brought a bunch of shopping bags. She also took some cakes to enjoy with her husband. She also took out a small box and showed some beautiful blue garters. The Duke immediately noticed that they were a little big for a girl of her build. Then he laughed and said that he had decided to give her matching cufflinks and garters in the color of her eyes. She admitted that she likes to please her husband and give him some gifts. So the girl asked the man to try them on right now in front of her. The Duke could not resist his wife, so he carefully took the cufflinks and tied them to his shirt. Schwer was incredibly happy when she saw her gift on her beloved man. She loved the fact that they could spend time together like this. The second registered magic stone was found earlier than the first, compared to the original. Irina's event will also take place earlier, which means it might be related to the Duke's death. Therefore, the girl wanted to enjoy the time with her husband and quickly find out what was happening. Reynald noticed that lately his wife had been reading a lot of books about the north and the temple. He realized that this was due to the unexpected appearance of a temple servant in the central palace. The girl was worried that the prophecy might be bad and related to the Blaine family. If she remembered correctly, the second stone referred to the brutal slaughter of the Blaine family. The knight's reaction to this at the training ground was also very telling. If the stone announces the weakening of the north, then everyone around us will start invading it. Suddenly, the Duke slapped our girl in the face and told her that she was worrying too much. He promised that he would not do anything that would bother his dear wife. After this, the man began to prepare for an official event and promised to return late at night. After that, he immediately went to meet John and Jim. The men noticed that this time, the Duke had a lot of decorations on his clothes. Reynald admitted that all these were gifts from his wife, who spent a lot of time selecting them. He explained that Schwer was tired after the morning training, so she decided to stay in the room. John began to worry when he heard that the girl was slightly injured. At that moment, Jim asked if the Duke had given his wife a gift in return. He said that the girl tried very hard and that even if she didn't like this gift, she should at least give something in return. However, suddenly a loud shout was heard, and one of the men called his master in a strange way. He announced that he had found another engraving stone, surprising everyone present. A kind of confusion began in the castle. From time to time, temple-shaped people appeared everywhere and talked about the records. There were rumors that the magic engraving stones contain the divine sacrament. It is believed that there are 5 stones, and they are hidden all over the continent. Previously, only one stone had been found, but suddenly a second Netri flower bloomed. And in such an unstable situation for the north, stones were found, as if waiting in the wings. A real chaos broke out in the palace when all the stones were found at the same time. The priests communicated with each other and discussed how this could happen. Announcements about the found stones were heard everywhere, which created even more chaos. Irina stepped forward and introduced herself. Then she asked all the guests to remain calm and stay in their seats. The girl asked to follow orders and waited for help from those present. John suggested gathering the northern guests separately but the Duke rejected this idea. Among the crowd, conversations began to spread that these stones were not real. At that moment, the main priest appeared and said that it was madness for any stone to now be called a real magic engraving stone. He realized that there were too many people with rich imaginations in the world. The man was very annoyed that panic had begun in his absence, and the confusion around him. It was the head priest, a man with beautiful white hair, Cedric. His subordinates knew about his habit of evasion, so they did not allow the man to escape. At that moment, Prince Simon approached Cedric from behind and greeted him. He expressed his hope that the head priest could quickly identify the real stones and reassure everyone present. At that moment, Irina stepped forward and brought several magic stones she had found. Cedric looked at them and immediately said that the stone itself and the source were a blatant forgery. Immediately, talk began in the crowd that a madman had appeared who dared to forge the sacred stone. Irina also approached the Duke and asked where his wife had gone. Reynald replied that he hadn't been feeling very well during the day, so he decided to rest in his room. Irina kept insisting that it seemed strange to her that the girl was not at the banquet in honor of her husband. She pointed out that when it comes to magic stones, someone from the Netri lineage cannot be excluded, to which the Duke immediately got angry and noted that the girl now belongs to the Blaine family. He noticed how Irina tensed up after these words and realized that the sisters' relationship was very bad. His wife had a completely different character than her sister. He remembered what happened on the first day of their arrival in the capital to attend the ball. That day, the girl immediately became sad after talking to her sister alone. Therefore, he was very angry now and promised that he would deal with the girl if she dared to bother them again. Irina was scared seeing him, but John was glad that at least some of the Duke's emotions had returned. At that moment, he was distracted by the prince, who suggested that they look at the magic stones together. Reynald was worried that his emotions would return to him after a while. The first stone said that, when Blaine eats something sweet, his facial expression becomes unbearably gloomy. All other stones had similar writings, which were completely different from the prophecy, and surprised everyone. The maid returned to her mistress and told her what happened with the magic stones. However, she noticed that the girl simply did not have time to write down all these stones and place them in different locations. All this time, she watched her mistress and believed her. That's why she protected her. The maid left the room to talk to the knights again and make them calm down. As soon as the door closed behind her, our heroine also got up from her seat and walked to the bed. There she opened the secret door and saw a recess in the floor where stone tablets lay. The girl was worried that, due to the text on the signs, everyone would immediately understand who she was talking about. She carefully picked up some fragrant flowers and placed them in a recess with signs. These flowers were ideal for covering tracks, but their smell was very unpleasant. The girl dragged 12 stone tablets, so her whole body ached now. The empire was founded by a divine messenger who resolved the disputes between Blaine and Netri, and the magic stones served as important proof of the fulfillment of this myth. Moreover, this is not just a forgery, but an act of slander against two great families at once. That could shake the foundations of the empire. The girl had a headache because she had spent a long time racking her imagination trying to write just compliments for Netri. Schwer was lucky that, thanks to the novel, she knew the description of the shape of the stone tablets and how to distinguish a forgery from the original. In the novel, after Reynald's death, the imperial palace was filled with monsters, thanks to which the girl learned about the presence of a secret passage in the room. Information about this would only spread after the Duke's death, so the girl did not want to use it. Schwer didn't want to think about it, so she started slapping her cheeks to drive those thoughts away. She was glad to have to move the needle from the north to the capital, forcing the temple to deal with it. The girl was distracted from her thoughts by the Duke, who entered the room and asked her why she was doing this. The heroine immediately jumped onto her bed and was incredibly happy to see her beloved husband. She tried to pretend she was very sick, but the Duke saw her jumping on the bed. Schwer kept insisting and asked the Duke to examine her hand. Suddenly, the man leaned forward sharply and brought his face close to the girl's. In fact, he only noticed a small pink petal in her hair. However, what interested him most was that there were traces of burning on this petal. The man said that he was asked to participate in the investigation of the poster incident. Schwer immediately began to worry that her sister might blame the North for this, so she looked her husband straight in the eye and told him that she was the one who forged those posters. The Duke already knew this. He was more interested in the reason for her action. According to the plot, when the content of the second tablet becomes public, the North will fall. And the girl wanted to prevent it, so she said that everyone had a wrong idea about the North and the Blaine Duchy. The dukes of his family are considered cruel and crazy people who enjoy killing. Reynald noticed that this was not far from the truth, but Schwer did not let him finish. The duke admitted that the desire to protect him was not a reason to forge magic tablets. Angela said that Netri was going to convene the nobility of the capital, so the heroine did this to divert public attention. The duke noticed that because of these actions of hers, a real commotion had occurred. He was worried that someone would find out about the girl's participation in this avenue. He remembered that forging stone tablets is equivalent to treason to the state. Schwer promised that if Reynald handed her over to the capital, the girl would cry day and night shouting his name. She will fall into despair and tirelessly repeat his name. Then everyone will think it's her fault. The duke found nothing to say to such a stupid blackmail and just looked at his wife. The girl even thought for a moment that the man was really thinking of handing her over. However, he then pointed his finger at her forehead and said that she was thinking some nonsense. He reminded his wife that they are now a Blaine family and all their affairs are common. Our heroine was impressed that the Grand Duke treated her so well. After this, the man ordered the girl to get ready and prepare to leave. John said that there is no circumstantial evidence linking the girl to this incident. Duke Reynald ordered him to check again, just to be sure. He couldn't believe that, with such a small body, Schwer was running around the imperial palace, placing heavy stone tablets everywhere. A little later, the girl changed her clothes. She left the room and took her husband's hand. Together, they went to the banquet hall to face the situation. The Duke and the Duchess entered the hall. Everyone around them immediately started whispering. Irina immediately stepped forward and said that she heard the girl was late due to fatigue. Schwer said that she had exerted a lot of energy when going out with her friends, so she was tired. She noticed that the recovery of the flower depended on the physical strength of the person, so she couldn't use this ability. The heroine also added that during her vacation, she collected gifts for her husband. She divided the things between those that the Duke would use and those that she would take with her to the north. Irina's subordinate approached her and confirmed the girl's words that she had indeed bought many things and was sorting them. He also confirmed the words that the girl used to walk around the city and shop with her friends. Irina was amazed at the extravagance of her older sister, but could do nothing about it. She thanked the girl for her cooperation and continued with her business. The Duke and Duchess took care of Irina, who was moving further and further away from them. Due to their bad relationship, from the outside, it might seem that the girl was mixing personal feelings with state affairs. At that moment, our heroine saw the high priest, who in the novel was described as more beautiful than any woman. Cedric assumed that the forger knew something about the real stone tablets, so he ordered them to find him immediately. In the novel, he was the only person on the continent who received God's blessing. He once came to the temple just to be given blood and food. Therefore, he prayed day by day with all his heart, so that he could live without making any effort. God heard his prayers, and Cedric became high priest in a short time. One day, an assistant approached him and told him that he needed to look at the stone tablets found in the mountains and bless the wedding. The man was annoyed that the aristocrats couldn't do anything without his help and constantly distracted him. Once a man dreamed of simply enjoying a carefree life. Now he was forced to decide other people's affairs. He didn't understand why there were so many reports about stone tablets recently. Having received a report that the Rocky Mountain was completely covered with stone tablets, Cedric had to lead the expedition of the priests. Moreover, they had to check the authenticity of the tablets, restore them, and even translate them. That's why the man was going crazy from the amount of work done, and he just wanted to relax. Therefore, he did not want to hear anything about the fact that stone tablets began to appear in the emperor's palace. He even ordered his assistants to take him directly to the palace while he was resting. However, the moment Cedric saw the tablet with his own eyes, his thoughts changed. When a stone tablet absorbs divine power, the symbol of a god appears on it. This was a way to distinguish a real tablet from a fake one. However, if a person with mediocre strength did this, he could lose his life. So no one but him would dare to do this. However, this forger knew the symbol of God. Moreover, although the tablet is weak, the divine power is felt, although it is a little different. This meant that there was a person who survived after engraving the design on the tablet. That's why Cedric was glad that an unfortunate person had appeared who would do all the work in his place. So the man assumed that the forger knew something about the real tablets. Due to the temple's rules, he could not talk about it, but he suggested postponing the official announcement of the second tablet. Schwer was glad that her plan worked and attracted the attention of the high priest. She was a little surprised that the high priest's explanation was different from the original novel. The Duke noticed that Cedric had never caused any trouble, although he seemed a little strange. The heroine knew that fake posters for the temple were a great insult. However, the high priest seemed too relaxed, as if he was even happy about it. The girl thought about talking to Cedric, but her friends distracted her. They were worried that the girl would feel bad after a walk together. They were also worried about tiring the girl with their stories. Schwer had just said goodbye to her friends and was about to head towards Cedric when she noticed that he was no longer there. At that moment, he himself approached her from behind, which greatly frightened the girl. Out of fear, she accidentally pushed him, and the high priest bit his tongue. Our heroine immediately regained her senses and officially greeted him, as etiquette demands. Now it would be good if our heroine found a topic to talk to him about. So, she asked for permission to take a minute of his time and recommend a date for the wedding. Now the man understood why the girl was looking at him so much and rejected her request. He began to give some advice that confused our heroine even more. Schwer said that she had already received the groom's consent, but the high priest misunderstood her. Seeing Cedric's condition, the girl decided to leave him behind and deal with it without the help of the temple. The man was simply happy about this and said that not everything should be blamed on the temple, but one should live life independently. Thanks to his words, the girl realized that she could do whatever her heart desired. However, at that moment, his assistant appeared behind the priest and told him that he could not use the halo and divine power to look more beautiful in the eyes of the people. Then the assistant introduced himself as Kyle and asked what happened. The high priest began to talk about how he had fallen in love with another girl, but the heroine disagreed with this. She said she already has a lover who is completely different from the priest and looks hundreds of times better. The assistant immediately apologized for the misunderstanding and for his boss's narcissism. At that moment, the Duke approached them, noticing that his wife was talking to someone. Kyle immediately recognized the Grand Duke of the North and congratulated him on his recent marriage. He promised that, as an apology for what happened, they would help find the best date for Blaine's wedding. And Netri, the high priest, heard the girl's surname and was very surprised, because he thought she should become the successor of her family. At that moment, a knight who had recently been injured approached the company and thanked Netri for her help with recovery. He apologized for his rudeness and thanked the girl for helping him heal. Our heroine happily accepted the bouquet as thanks and asked him to take better care of himself in the future. After this, the knight bowed to the girl again and returned to his business. Schwer was glad that the incident at the training ground ended so well. At some point, it even seemed to her that the Duke was starting to get a little jealous of her. A little later, the boys were in their room doing business. The Duke was reviewing the documents, and his wife surrounded him and begged him to go to bed together. The man couldn't understand why the girl still wouldn't give up and kept wanting to see his sleeping face. Schwer apologized for accepting flowers from another man in front of the Duke this afternoon. She was very afraid that she might have annoyed him greatly with this behavior. When she received the bouquet, the Duke's mood seemed strange and tense. Because of the fake posters, the girl spent 3 whole days in the room, and on the 4th day, she finally went out and was able to take a walk. She arrived at the training ground and saw that during this time, the knights had built a real throne for her and a shelter from the wind and dust. First of all, the girl greeted her husband and told him that she would take care of him. She showed the tent that the knights had made for her and asked to rest with her. However, it turned out to be too small and was a place where only our heroine could enter. Suddenly, the boys' attention was drawn by a noisy crowd celebrating Commander Irina's victory. The girl was the first Southerner to hold this honorable position. Even her sister was forced to admit that Irina had achieved this position thanks to something more than cunning. If the girl becomes the chief commander of the knights, then there will be no one left in the capital to support the Duke. However, she didn't understand how Irina knew that the second son could also use the sword skills. If there was nothing about this in the original, Irina approached the Duke and asked what he thought of her skills. Schwer understood that this was a trick question. Any answer would put her husband at a disadvantage. Therefore, she decided to interrupt their conversation and handed each person present a daisy. She added that if Lady Irina is not very confident in her skills, then she needs some time to recover. However, the girl noticed that her sister did not quite understand her words. She quickly pretended to have some important business to attend to and decided to leave first. The heroine herself counted that the Duke used the sword 65 times during training, so she wanted to receive 65 bouquets of flowers, after which she asked for the chamomile to be returned to her to keep the bouquet intact. After some time, the Duke returned to train with the knights. John explained that from that day on, he no longer participates in battles, but protects the Duchess. The girl didn't understand what could happen to her in the capital, where everything was safe. However, before she could finish speaking, a loud sound was heard, and something happened in their tent. John helped the girl get out of danger and looked back to see what it was. Behind them, the boys saw a company of knights on horseback, covered in dried blood. Captain Irina ordered her knights to capture all these people alive. And animals. Schwer immediately remembered the Duke and worried about his safety. That's why the girl got distracted and didn't notice that danger was approaching directly towards them. She looked back and saw a huge horse towering right above their heads. The Duke quickly ordered John to cover the girl's eyes with his hand and hold her there. After this, terrible sounds of tearing flesh and sword fighting were heard. After some time, the girl opened her eyes and saw unconscious horses and people lying in front of her. The Duke used his Blaine magic to save his wife from danger. Schwer immediately noticed that Reynald's eyes were as cold and empty as the bottom of the deep sea where there was nothing. They were the same as during the punitive expeditions to the far north. When you lose all your emotions, your mind becomes so clouded that you are no longer capable of distinguishing good from evil. That's why the girl ordered the knight to bring all the daisies from her room to protect her husband. She needed to stop him somehow, so the girl headed towards the Duke. Irina stood in her way and ordered her to stop acting so recklessly. The commander insisted that the Duke ignored orders and killed everyone, which was considered a violation of the agreement by the North. However, Schwer noticed that her husband didn't kill anyone. The people were simply unconscious. That's why the girl ran towards her husband, jumping over huge cracks in the ground. At one point, she miscalculated her strength and began to fall, but the Duke caught her in his arms. He snapped out of his stupor and helped the girl stand up. The man apologized to his wife for unnecessarily worrying her. Just at that moment, the knight returned and brought daisies from her room. At that moment, Irina approached and said that as punishment for violating the order, she would report this situation to the prince. The girl added that by acting this way, the Duke could destroy important evidence and put them at a disadvantage. Schwer noticed that the situation was different from the original, but if things continued this way, the knights who returned alive would not last long and would die. Therefore, she decided to show everyone her success by collecting daisies for 3 days. The girl turned to her sister and asked her to invite the high priest. Duke Reynald again felt this strange feeling, as if there was only a void inside him. The man seemed to be in a space where there was nothing around him. The Duke didn't even remember at what moment and why he drew his sword. Suddenly, through this oppressive darkness, something bright and light began to appear. The next moment, he heard a loud voice shouting his name. The man looked up and saw that it was his own wife calling him. He saw a girl jumping recklessly over a very deep ditch. He didn't understand at all why such a fragile woman was behaving so strangely. At the last moment, the man managed to raise his hands and catch the girl, saving her from falling. After that, the surviving knights began to run around the training ground and help the wounded. The assistant informed Irina that all these knights were from the border regions. A couple of minutes later, the chief physician and his subordinate assistants rushed to them. At that moment, Irina announced that the monsters had broken through the northern defenses. According to the original, the only casualties were the knights accompanying the temple servants who announced the appearance of the tablets. However, this time others also suffered, as the church delegation stayed in the capital a little longer. The Duke carefully examined the victims and said that their wounds were too clean, and that monsters could not have caused such damage. While the assembled people were discussing among themselves, Schwer whispered to her husband that she would distribute her healing daisies to all the victims. The Duke listened to the whispers of the people around him and began to doubt what had happened. However, Schwer pointed out that she certainly trusts her husband and will always be on his side. She unconditionally believed in his words and was ready to support any of his decisions. After this, the girl went to the victims and offered them chamomile, which could relieve the pain for a while. The girl knew that at this rate all the wounded would die, and the North would take full responsibility for this incident, and would be completely isolated from the world. Therefore, she needed to find knights who could confirm that this was not a monster attack. People and animals were still scared, so they reacted sharply when an unknown person approached them. Fortunately, John was able to calm the horse and protect his mistress from injury. The girl could not reach the wounded soldier who was sitting on horseback, so John picked her up. Schwer felt a little uncomfortable being in this position, in her subordinate's arms. The girl only hoped that her daisies would help the wounded hold out until the high priest arrived. Kyle announced that there were only 3 dead knights and 27 wounded knights in the incident. Immediately after this, the high priest used his magic power and helped all the wounded to heal. Divine power surrounded him and helped everyone he passed by. Schwer was incredibly impressed by Cedric's magical powers that helped in her plan. The man was very narcissistic, so he was pleased when the girl praised him. As a token of gratitude for saving the knights, she handed him one of her daisies. Cedric took the flower in his hands and looked at it closely, sensing something. He looked closely at all the knights and noticed that they had exactly the same flowers in their hands. The man turned to his assistant and asked if he had noticed anything strange about these flowers. He had never heard of daisies blooming among the future heads of the Netri family, since the heir's flower should be lantana. The subtle power felt in the chamomile was very similar to what the high priest felt in the fake tablets. That's why he thought that in one generation of the family, 2 people with the ability were born at once. The high priest considered this a very funny coincidence and looked forward to what this could lead to in the future.